Hey everyone, it's a time for another lecture. Here we go. Origins of U.S. Government, Chapter 2-3, the Articles of Confederation. So, you've already had the colonies rebel against King George's insufferable rule. And of course, the key to that ruling was, of course, no taxation without representation, right? So you've already had the First Continental Congress, which was actually the first government the colonies ever had. And then, of course, you have the Second Continental Congress, which then instead also wrote the Declaration of Independence. And TJ went ahead and wrote that and sent it off to King George with the signatures of all the founding fathers, including, of course, John Hancock, the president of the Second Continental Congress. What else have you already had? Well, you've already had the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the shot heard around the world. So we are in the midst of an American Revolution. All right, great. Everything's happening. The revolution will happen, of course, the Battle of Yorktown and the surrender of the English. But we're left with a vacuum of a very strong type of government that can carry us the next era of the United States of America. So, as Thomas Jefferson and Franklin, Adams, Livingston, and all these other gentlemen who were all involved, in drafting the plan for a form of government that would take place after independence, they needed to begin to make rules of how the government would work and how the states would relate to one another. Now, the draft or the plan that they were talking about needed to be strong. It needed a strong central government, a strong national government. However, there were others in the group that favored more of a local and state government, that a central government would actually look like a tyranny. Like we would substitute one king for another. Okay, maybe one king for an oligarch, a group of kings, right? So what they decided was, you know what? Let's create this League of Friendship, also known as a confederation. So all they had was a piece of paper that said all 13 states would act equally amongst themselves. Okay? Well, I can tell you right now that's not going to work because all you have to do is think about you you driving a car with four friends in it and all deciding where to go eat. Yeah, yeah, good luck with that, guys. It takes my family and I about an hour to decide where to go eat. We keep arguing about what we want and we don't want. So, anyways, going back to the League of Friendship, what it did was it actually essentially set up a rules about what the national government could and could not do. This plan, authored primarily by John Dickinson, was called the Articles of Confederation and was not adopted immediately, okay? It was not. The plan, authored by John Dickinson, called the Articles of Confederation, was by March 1781, all 13 states had actually finally ratified it. So John Dickinson, what he came up with was this idea that the states could all always agree with each other. Therefore, each state actually had one vote in Congress, no matter what the population. You could have a state that had maybe 2 million people and a state that had 50,000 people. No matter if one state had more than the other, well, guess what? They all had the same amount of power. Guys, I can tell you right now that was not going to work out. States, governments could do everything that was specifically mentioned in articles, and that's another problem. So we start seeing these problems in the Confederation period. Okay? Problems that grew from the Revolutionary War, of course, was hey, war's not cheap. The war cost the national government, the new national government of the United States, $40 million, and they owed that money to foreign adversaries. Okay? So the states were actually very financially strapped. Well, what's the only way you can get that money back? Taxes, revenue from taxation. Guys, this is the same thing that the colonists were actually fighting against. But they have no choice this time. They have to pay these taxes. So after the Revolutionary War, the 13 states saw themselves as independent, not just from England, but from each other. So they began to identify themselves. You start having what is known as the states calling themselves the people from the states using the state's name and adding the Indians or the isms or the like Virginians, the Georgians. But of course, they could not forget what we were all Americans. Okay. So again, you begin to have this, brewing of issues and isolationism from the other states. Now, going back to the debt, many states were requested from Congress to help fund the national government to help repay war debts. So what they did was the Congress asked them, "Hey, can you send a little bit of money this way so our national government can survive and not bankrupt itself?" Well, guess what? A lot of the states begin to ignore that request. Because why? Because the states themselves didn't have much money either. They didn't have that much money either. They were having massive amounts of debt also. All we had throughout the colonies, well, now the states, was debt, 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 debt. And so the state governments had debt, the national governments had debt. All this is creating a major problem. And here's a bigger one: the new national government, the new central government, couldn't do anything about it. Remember, there is no real national government. It's actually quite weak. It's impotent. The state governments were the strong ones under the Articles of Confederation. Individual state governments were the ones that had all the power under the Articles of Confederation. This was going to be a big problem, which it will turn into. Congress could do very little. The National Congress could do very little to force the states to do anything. So, of course, anytime also Congress wanted to pass a law, all the states had to agree. Each state had a single vote, and votes of anything five of smaller states could block measures easily. Congress couldn't do anything. It was a massive, weak national government. Guys, this is one of the main points of the Articles of Confederation, one of the main weaknesses. It had a very weak national government. It really couldn't do it. Another one was, you're going to find out later, there was no executive and there was no judiciary. Oh my God, he didn't have anything. But you know what? Stop battering the Articles of Confederation, Jimenez. They must have had something good. Well, they did. Some of the more important contributions to the nation by the Articles of Confederation was that in 1783, the Confederation actually finally signed a peace treaty with Britain, and therefore America is finally recognized as an independent country by the British. And of course, along with the Articles of Confederation, under this government, we begin to expand massively. Okay, as you can see from the image, we begin to go from the little area that we were before. I'm going to get my pen here so I can draw. So we begin to go from this right here, this little area that we had. Oh my God, we are expanding. Look at that. So yeah, under the Articles of Confederation, we begin to expand. Oh, but wait a minute. Are these lands empty? No, they're not empty. Who lives there? Well, Native Americans, of course. And God, were we nice to them? Were we just gonna let them, were they just going to give up their land? Of course not. We are going to start seeing a major revolt by the Native Americans also as we begin to conquer, or the United States of America at this time begins to conquer their land. That's going to be another problem. But, anyways, continuing with the achievements. One of the other major achievements of the Articles of Confederation was that the Land Ordinance of 1785 allowed the government to survey and divide the Northwest Territory into townships of equal acreage. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you recognize this, but this does look like one of the states that we know today. And, of course, that state is Ohio. Ohio. This Northwest Ordinance, of course, you learned about it in eighth grade in U.S. history. You learned about it in 11th grade, so I'm not going to go over it too much. But let's go back to the problems because, God, Jimenez, you really sound like you don't like the Articles of Confederation. I don't. They were real weak. And again, one of the major problems was a strong national government. It was lacking a strong national government. Therefore, again, the taxation without representation issue gets brought up, and people are feeling oppressed by this taxation. You're going to see another rebellion. I mean, it wasn't just too long ago that everybody rebelled against Britain. So now you're starting to see colonists, which are now citizens of the United States, rebel against its own government. And the first rebellion you have, and the more, well, actually not the first one, but the more important one that stands out is Daniel Shay's rebellion of that would lead to, of course, a major change. Shay's rebellion, and as you can see, and Daniel Shay is a reputable individual. He served as one of the leaders of the Continental Army, okay? A former captain, all right? So he had a good reputation. The problem is that he led a group of farmers who were, forced to give up their property because they owed so much money to the banks. The banks went in and foreclosed on that property. And he said that's not fair. The banks need to give time to the farmers to earn some money so they could pay back their debt. But of course, with no judiciary to go settle arguments, no executive to give a command, and a weak central government, these guys had nowhere to go. Absolutely nowhere to go. So what they have now is Shay's rebellion, okay, with a Massachusetts militia behind him. Okay, Daniel Shay went on to, of course, rebel against the new Articles of Confederation government. Now, of course, the rebellion was put down very easily, but it brought to light issues. It brought to light the issues that they were having under the Articles of Confederation. So, therefore, the founding fathers started realizing that. Okay, even look at Harry Knox's letter to King George. Okay, this dreadful situation has alarmed every man of principle and property in New England. What gives us security against the violence of our tireless men, our government must be strengthened and changed. So again, Henry Knox is already asking for change. What everybody begins to ask for change. So there you have it. There's a movement to revise the articles. Let's go ahead and let's look at the articles, see what's really wrong with them, and see if we can change them. I can tell you right now, that idea is going to be abandoned very quickly because they're like, nah, I think we're going to have to start from scratch, which they will. And that's where you will give birth to what is now known as the Constitutional Convention of 1787 that will take place in Philadelphia. Ladies and gentlemen, that ends our lecture on the Articles of Confederation. Don't forget to finish your class notes. Don't forget to complete the bell ringer, of course, and don't forget to finish your independent activity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening today. Bye bye.